The Why Me Project, an exclusive presentation of Faith Strong Today.
Usually, we do something called Hollie and Friends.
Yeah, I was going to say something about this, because today it's not Hollie and Friends. It's like you actually have a friend on the podcast today.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know if Doug will admit it. Well, once we bring him on, we'll see. But yeah, Johnny and Friend.
Yeah. How do you feel?
It has a ring to it.
Ish.
All right. Without further ado, Johnny and Friend and Hollie, or Johnny, Hollie, and new friend Doug Kirchner. My friend, how are you?
Doing all right. How are you guys?
We're good. Thank you for saying yes to your one friend. Or not your one friend, Johnny's one friend.
I have many friends.
You do. You are probably Johnny's only friend on this podcast.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Shots
harsh.
fired. I know.
We like to ask the skill testing question, Doug, because we never know where it's going to go. And that is, who are you and where did you come from?
Wow. I grew up in East Cleveland in an area called Collinwood. Grew up as a kid whose parents weren't really good parents at the time. You know, we had mafia ties, we had drug dealers, we had all this sort of sordid life pre-finding God that you know, when you look back at it, like, I mean, even me telling my children, you know, they look at me and they're like, are you serious? These are our family members? Because like my great uncle was one of the original head of the five families in the New York mob. His name was Joe the Boss Masseria. And then he was murdered by Lucky Luciano. And my parents got involved where my uncle Sal was a drug dealer. And they dealt with people like Frankie Valli of the Four Seasons, Pablo Escobar, all these major people that, you know, you look back now and you're like, wow, that there's books and TV shows and stuff written about these people. And it's crazy. So my parents did all that kind of stuff. I mean, at age 6 or 7, I remember having Colombians living in my bedroom, cutting cocaine and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, all that went away and my parents became Christians. And that was a weird situation because they ended up separating for a long while. And I believe it was my mom who got saved first. They ended up getting back together. And then all of a sudden we're all going to church and our lives are turned upside down. We had no idea what was going on. But oddly enough, when we were going through the mobster stuff and my dad and uncle were being chased by my other uncle who had threatened us, and we fled to Canada.
We're happy to have you.
Why did we pick Canada out of all places to hide out? The only thing that I remember, because I was young, we went to some castle in Ontario.
Casa Loma in Toronto?
Yes. Yes.
It's one of my favorite places.
And then I remember a restaurant that served chicken and ribs that was shaped like a UFO. That's all I remember.
That's amazing.
So how I got here, it's many roads, many turns, twists, and forks that led me to being a husband, a father, a probation officer, a former concert promoter, band manager, record label owner, and it's just been crazy.
I mean, like, the start of your life is so wild. Like, are you going to write a book about your life at some point?
Everybody tells me that I should write a book.
Yes.
But I don't have I'm ADHD filled, so I don't have
best
the
books
opportunity to sit down and type and put down all my thoughts and all this stuff in order. So if anybody out there is a ghostwriter and interested, I'm down.
Your parents come to faith. They're you're kind of finding your way through it. And Holly and I love to ask this question: when did their faith become your faith?
Mm-hmm.
When was it your own?
To be honest, I think in the way that I remember it, in the way that my mom used to tell it, I actually came to faith before anybody. Because, you grow up Italian, you grow up in the situation that we grew up in. I was going to Catholic school, and while all this craziness of guns and drugs and stuff is all around us, I'm actually writing Bible books about Paul and about Timothy. And my mom specifically remembers one day that I was sitting and just drawing out this thing, and she on this paper, and she goes, "What are you writing?" And I said something about Paul and about how he suffered through being in prison. And mind you, I'm like 6 years old. And, when they became Christians, we obviously left the Catholic Church, but I started grounding myself in my own faith, because I firmly believe that my parents, their salvation wasn't my salvation. There's no way that could have been. Mm-hmm. So I think probably by my early teenage life, I started coming into my own. I started making major decisions that would affect the rest of my life about Christianity and where I sat with God.
You were the cycle breaker in your family. That's a pretty incredible place to be.
I guess I never looked at it like that, but it's to me, I pretty much forged my own path.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So
was there ever the temptation to go into a mafia life?
No.
Yeah.
Honestly, I've never. So like even as a kid, when we would play cops and robbers, I was always a cop. I was always the guy trying to be the hero, never the villain.
Because I'm thinking, you're in school and you're like, oh, I need a 4.0 average. Just going to call up my uncle.
So you have this faith, and one of the things that I know about you is that, and you had mentioned, being a part of the music industry, record label, and band manager. How did that come to fruition?
All by accident, honestly. I was in a Christian school. I had gotten kicked out. My parents decided to try to help me homeschool me. So there was a lot of time on my hands because my dad worked midnight shift, and he was the one that was teaching me. And so I got bored, and I decided, I saw that DC Talk and Michael W. Smith were coming into town on the Go West Young Man tour for Michael W. Smith. And I'm like, I want to go to that concert.
Yeah.
So I jokingly, not jokingly, I called the record company, told them I worked for this local Christian music magazine, which I didn't. Mind you, I was probably about 13 years old. And I asked them if I could do an interview with DC Talk. They said yes. And 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from some guy named John Digman, who actually owned the Christian music magazine, and said, yeah, so you're a writer for us? That's what you told? That's what you told Forefront Records? And I said, well, and he goes, so you're going to be a writer for us. I'm going to let you do the interview. I got it all set up. You're going to go. And I went with this local Christian DJ at the time. His name was John Palmer. And we ended up going and interviewing Toby, Michael, and Kevin, and then going to have pizza with Michael W. Smith and Toby and Michael. Amazing.
You got an interview we would just faint over. Like,
yeah.
What?
and well, and that's what, so I'll say this. When Toby, Michael, and Kevin were sitting there, they're like, how old are you? And I remember telling them, and they're like, like they didn't take it seriously at first, but then, the questions that I asked were, they really loved the questions because it was so out of the box and so not your typical radio or magazine questions. It's what a normal fan would ask. And then they actually thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I actually got to know them a little bit and spent some time with them. So that spawned an almost 30-year career in music.
Wow.
By, honestly, those guys, everybody that was involved with that whole situation, being just great to a kid that was lying and sinning at the time. But, I ended up doing major interviews for this magazine that they couldn't even get. Like I did Guardian, I did Whiteheart, I did all these bands. So for all of you out in whatever land you're in, those are old bands.
Yes.
They're not a new generation of artists because I'm old.
I think a lot of those, as we call them, our projectors, are familiar with these bands. We grew up with them. They were life-changing for us, just hearing music that wasn't secular, but was fun and had lyrics that were uplifting and inspiring.
And so that led into, I promoted my first concert at 13 with a Christian hard rock metal band called Bride. They would not even get out of the vehicle once they found out how old I was until I handed them $500 cash. And they're like, all right, we're loading in. And it was at a venue that I wasn't even old enough to be in.
Oh, wow.
So it did so much. And it's such a different time, but it was one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had.
Just that, even like you're 13 and now you've already done all and more of what we've done in our own career. Now I'm starting to feel like, what have I done with my life?
Right?
Okay. So, you're 13. Where do you go from there?
So from 13 to about 25 is when a lot of stuff came to a halt. But I did concerts. I've promoted over 2,000 concerts. I worked for two of the biggest venues in Cleveland at the time. I ended up touring around all over with different bands, and one of the artists that I worked very closely with was a band called POD. I worked very closely with actually one of the first tours that I ever went on in my life was with Carmen.
Amazing.
I did the standard tour as a merch guy for them for like 7-8 dates, and that was the craziest experience ever because it was all arena dates, and you're like used to church shows and all this little stuff. And now you're running around arenas. But it spawned so much that was my identity that I don't even know where to go.
You're doing all of this stuff. Why? And it seems like a phenomenal life. And like you'd said, hanging out with POD and, doing these interviews. And why then did you get out of it?
Yeah.
I was working very closely with a Christian hip hop artist named Dirt from Shadow the Locust and POD. And we went on tour. I was married, came home, found out that my wife was cheating on me. We got separated. We had a kid. And so I gave up that life to be a dad, to fight for custody of my daughter at the time. And so I was 25, unemployed, fighting for my kid, living with my parents again. And, it just, everything had changed at that point. And then I got divorced. I met a girl. We got married, and we ended up, it was really quick. It was a 6-month kind of romance kind of thing. We've been married now for 21 years, so it's been great.
Amazing.
Not all of it, but...
Yeah, marriages work, yes.
But it all ended because I decided to say my child was more important than any of this.
Family is so key. And I think a lot of people would have been tempted just to stay on the road. And I love that you said, nope, I've got a father role to be to my daughter.
Well, one of the things that I'll say that had happened is that music started shifting, ministries started shifting, the culture shifted a lot. And I had owned a record company, and I had, at the time, Jeremiah Dirt, Subculture Deviants, which was another Christian hip hop group, a group called the Juliana Theory that were on Tooth and Nail, 12th Tribe, a hip hop group. I had an assorted amount of groups. One of the biggest ones that we were going to be launching was John Rubin. And in the middle of the night, something happened, tapes went missing, and then all of a sudden, John Rubin's on Goatee Records. It's a painful story, but I had realized that you really had no real friends. You had no real anybody that was a real confidant was going through pretty much the same turmoil you were going in. You had no money. So I think for me, it was just time. It didn't stop me from like doing other stuff in the music business, like promoting concerts and stuff like that. I mean, I still ended up doing that almost another 10 years. I just shifted and refocused stuff. Honestly, I went into the mainstream end. I started working with secular bands because I trusted them more than I did the Christian end. You know, if you talk to anybody, a lot of that is a common story.
Yeah.
So you fight for your daughter.
Yeah.
You become newly married.
Yep.
Granted, you said that you also didn't have a job. So, I mean, it sounds like, though, that this was perfect. This was like the perfect ending to everything. You kind of ride off into the sunset. So,
yeah, I kind of rode off into the sunset, started doing things that were out of my wheelhouse, like owning. I started working for a cell phone company. I never, at that time I didn't. So I'll shift back. I dropped out in 9th grade to focus on music because there was nothing else for me. I was a horrible student. I failed 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and I think even 4th grade before anybody realized that I had learning disabilities and ADHD. And so I'm at that time 25 years old, spent the last however many years out on the road, chasing stardom and chasing dreams. The only people that would give me a chance was a local concert venue called Peabody's Down Under, and I ended up working for them and got into the mainstream secular music scene, and it was very eyes wide open kind of thing. And through that, I mean, I spent the next, I want to say, 4 years doing the mainstream music end. And then I had a part-time gig working for a cell phone store. And then our family got hit with the tragedy of my daughter being diagnosed with brain cancer. That just halted everything. She was at the time 6 years old. And we ended up, I remember I had my now 18-year-old, but he was an infant. We went to the library because we couldn't afford to rent movies. So we had to go to the library and get some movies. And we were driving back, and my ex-wife called me and said, I'm at the children's hospital in the emergency room. You need to get down here. They found a brain tumor on your daughter. And that's how the next 6 years of my life started moving. So it was a crazy scenario.
6 years. Oh my goodness. Walking through that journey, were you grateful you had shifted out of the music industry to be with her more?
So I honestly was still foot in, foot out. I was still managing some artists. Actually, I had a big tour going on at that time. And I was, working from home, and I just called them and I said, guys, you're going to have to handle it yourselves. And unfortunately, that happened. But I, again, dropped everything and I took care of my kid. I don't think I left the hospital. She went in September, and I didn't leave the hospital until November, maybe 1 or 2 times.
So she's diagnosed with this. Was there she can beat it, or was it terminal? What was the diagnosis?
So originally we started, we fought with her pediatrician for about 9 months because she started having major nosebleeds and headaches and throwing up. And my aunt, who at the time was a 20-year pediatric nurse, and she said, she goes, Dougie, I think Skylar might have a brain tumor. Every time we took her to the pediatrician said, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. It's all just up here. It's all in her mind. Finally, we had met with a neurologist. The neurologist said, it's because she's the new sister. She's got to play second fiddle to your new baby and all this kind of stuff. And we literally just fought. And so the day that I got the call from my ex-wife, the next day we were in the hospital. They were doing emergency surgery. The tumor ended up being the size of a navel orange in the back of her head.
Oh,
and imagine that in a 6-year-old's head. I remember the neurologist, and he's one of the top of the line neurosurgeons in the country. He came out of that OR room and he looked at me and he had rage in his face, like, how did it get this bad? Mm-hmm. And we explained, and he was furious. He said if she did not come in when she did, that she probably would have died within a week to a month because the pressure was just that bad. And so she was in a coma from the day of the surgery to, I want to say the beginning of November. So she was in a coma for months, because it was like September 6th or something like that to November. And the night, we never knew if they told us that she could possibly be paralyzed from the left side. And she would maybe never talk again. So the one night I'm just in the hospital, and it was like the middle of the night, and the nurses kept on having to come and give her, Tylenol with codeine and stuff to make her comfortable. Mind you, she's still in a coma. And I'm like, she wouldn't, because she used to be able to open her mouth, and she wouldn't open her mouth. And I was just talking to her. I'm like, come on, honey, open your mouth. The nurse has got to give this to you. And I was just talking to her, and she kicked me with her left leg and said, I don't want any. I want to sleep. And I did cartwheels down the hallway in the pediatric NICU. I'm like freaking out. And from that point on, she was able to talk, able to move her left side. But no one knew, because we hadn't gone through radiation or any of that kind of stuff yet. But the prognosis was good because she woke up.
Over the next 6 years, how does a family function knowing that your daughter is still struggling?
The first year, it was learning how to walk, learning how to talk, learning how to eat. All that stuff that she learned as an infant to toddler, she had to learn all over again. She used to make fun of herself because she walked like a penguin. Us as a family, I think it brought us closer. She had a stepmom and her mom, and it kind of, like, for that moment in time, it was whatever we needed to do to get her back to where she needs to be. So for 6 years, it's actually 5 years, we went on with doctor visits pretty much once a week. all this stuff until she went into remission 4 years after her first surgery. And then we were on the tail end of her being in remission. And once you go into remission with brain cancer as a kid, you end up going and saying, you have to do MRIs. I think it was like for her it was once every, I think 3 months, and then it went to 6 months. And then we were on the last one for a year. They found something. And this to me, I've told the story a million times, but it's one of the hardest stories to tell because we're sitting in this little hospital, doctor's office, with her, with my daughter Skylar, her mom, my wife, the doctor, the nurse practitioner, and a neurologist. All the doctor said is that we found something on the MRI. We're not concerned yet, but so this was October. He goes, we're not concerned yet, but we are going to watch it. So we want you back here in December to see if what we found grows. While they said that, I audibly heard God in my head say, I'm not saving her this time. You get to that point, and I'm like, did I hear what I just heard? So we get in the car. My daughter went with her mother to her house, and I looked at my wife and I said, God just spoke to me and said he's not going to save her this time. And of course, everybody's like, oh, come on now. And I said, I've prayed my whole life. I've thought I've heard the voice of God. I thought that God's given me wisdom and stuff, but I go, this was audible. This was real. So I told my wife, but I said, let's wait and see what the doctors say in December. So we called family. Family is freaking out, because we all have just walked through one of the biggest valleys. Now we're going back into that valley. We were so excited that this was the last MRI, and here we go again. So December comes around, we go for an MRI. They say it grew, but they're not sure what it is. So they want to do a biopsy, which means they have to cut open her head again. And so they scheduled that for January 3rd. And so we prepared throughout that whole time to, have Christmas and all that kind of stuff. And we ended up being in the hospital for like 7 days, which was way shorter than the last time she had her head cut open for them to do the biopsy. So the doctors came back after the surgery. They're like, it looks like what they call radiation necrosis, and not to be worried, but they're sending it off to pathology. We should know something within 2 days. 7 days later, we're still not getting any word, and we're sitting in our hospital room. And you have a kid who's 11 years old who is like, this is boring. I want to go home. I want to go back to school. I want to go play with my friends, whatever. So I decided to jump on her bed and act like a gorilla and making her laugh. And the nurse practitioner stood there, and I didn't see her at first, and I could see her crying when I noticed her. We're really close. So the nurse practitioner walks in and she goes, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. And she goes, she's got stage 3, stage 4, if I can remember how to pronounce, astrocytoma glioma. There's no cure. And I said, what do you mean there's no cure? They say it's a radiation-based brain tumor that there is no cure for it yet. I said, so what does that mean? She goes, I honestly don't know at this time. We want to do X, Y, and Z, and let's just fight it. And so I'm like, we were up for the challenge before. We'll do this challenge. She ended up, a few months later, the doctor said to us, I'm going to tell you that we're going to give her 12 to 18 months. So you need to prepare your lives. Meanwhile, I go back to my initial, God told me I'm not going to save her. It snowballed through that whole scenario. I had, at that time, was owning a chain of cell phone stores. I closed every single store. Our lives stopped, and we said, whatever we built, we can rebuild. We're going to take this year or 18 months, and we're just going to spend it however we can with her. So we ended up taking a 3-month tour, or not 3-month, 3-week tour of the South, going down to Disney World because that's where she wanted to go. Life as we knew it, because at that time we had my now 18-year-old, and we had he was not even a year old yet when she was diagnosed with brain cancer. Her other brother, Mason and Ian, and we jumped in a van and went traveling down to Disney, which I don't want parents to ever do, especially for 3 weeks. It was long.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be an actual tour of hospitals because she needed blood transfusions and platelet transfusions. And I mean, when you think of a 11, 12-year-old kid going through what some adults can't even handle.
Yeah.
And she handled it like a trooper. Like, she's like, I'm not missing Disney. We're going. I'll just go get my platelets at nighttime, and we'll go back the next day. I'm like, whatever you want to do. It's your trip. So that was April and May. And then by the time we came back, she got out of school, and she was already basically confined to a wheelchair. And then things progressively got worse. And she ended up, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to have her because we're a split family, right? So hospice and palliative care asked her, what is it that you want? Where do you want to be? Do you want to be in the hospital? We can set you up with a cool room. Do you want to go to hospice? And she goes, no, I want to go to my grandma's house, but I want my dad to take care of me because he's always taking care of me. I revert back to when I fought for her to have her, and I said, are you sure you want me to take care of you? And she goes, you've always been the one. You've always taken care of me. So I'm like, okay, we'll figure it out. My family's over here. My parents live over here. Her mom lives in Cleveland. Her mom lived about 40 minutes away from us. So she wasn't that happy, but I told her, do what you need to do. Come here whenever you want to. But this is what she wants. It got to a point where she was bedridden and she couldn't do anything. And so it's like taking care of a baby again. One day we were talking, and she looks at me and she goes, what do you want to do when you grow up, Dad? I'm already grown there, kid. And she goes, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I never graduated high school because I decided to go do music and all this other crazy stuff. And she goes, well, what do you need to do to graduate high school? And I said, well, I need to get my GED. I go, but with everything that's been going on, I haven't had the time to even think about that. And she goes, when I die, promise me you'll go get your GED. I made that promise. I said, okay. And then I said, I don't know still when I'm going to find the time, but I promise you that I'll get my GED. Well, she passed away. And I went, and my wife told me, she goes, I think it's time. I go, time for what? And she goes, I think it's time for you to go get your GED because we have nothing. Our house was being foreclosed on. My business was foreclosed on. We lost everything. And she said, we'd do it all over again if it was any of our other children, but you need to go do something. So I signed up I was on unemployment, and unemployment actually put me in the right direction of the right people to go get my GED. From January to July, I studied and got my GED. I fulfilled that promise, which was tough.
No kidding. Honestly, your daughter just sounds like such a brave fighter, an incredible young girl.
By far braver than anybody that I know.
In the midst of everything that you're going through, and this is part of the reason why Hollie and I do this, it's the Why Me Project, where you ask God in those hills and valleys of life, God, why me? Why are you using me in this way? Or why do I have to go through this? Hearing your story, can you pinpoint a moment where you had asked God that question, God, why me?
A week or so before my daughter died, I was fighting with myself in the bathroom, which sounds really bad. But I'm staying at my parents' house. I'm so frustrated. I'm so angry. And I'm having a conversation like I am now, talking. And I'm just like, God, this makes no sense. You saved her, and yet here we are. We're going through it again. And we know there's an end now. I'm mad. And I heard a voice again, and he said, I didn't save my own son. Her life cannot be fulfilled until she passes. Now, I didn't understand what that meant until a year or so later. But I walk out of the bathroom. My mom's sitting on the couch in their living room, and she goes, did you get your answer? And I'm like, what do you mean did I get my answer? She goes, I heard. She actually heard what was said and what was said back. And I'm like, yeah, I still don't agree with it, but I don't understand it, and I don't care to at this moment. But my daughter, her life could not be fulfilled until she passed. What I found out that meant was she had touched so many people that I didn't even know. My mom used to say when she was a little baby and a little kid, that she would just have her in the grocery store in a cart, and my daughter would just smile at everybody. And she would just make some of the coldest looking people smile because she was just that cute. It's all me. But she ended up, I found out from a bunch of her friends from school that I didn't even know of, that they were going to her grave on her anniversary of her death. And they were, and mind you, where she's buried versus where we live is about 35, 40 minutes away. And so these kids were having their parents take them. And then, Facebook started to become a thing, and MySpace was not. And these kids were contacting me. So I got to share with who Skylar was with them, who she was, as she loved God. I mean, there was never a time that she didn't pray. There wasn't a time that she didn't listen to Christian music, except for that evil Justin Bieber character. And she just exuded somebody that the church talks about, living the life, living it outright. And so through her death, through my promise to her to go get my GED, I went into the police academy. That's a sore subject, but I was old, and, I was 10 years older than most of the guys in the police academy. So when I got out of that, I ended up going into college, only because the program that I did with my GED there was a program that the college, Kent State University, had a deal worked out with. And so I ended up going for a week boot camp. And I guess I ended up signing up for college and all this other stuff that I didn't even know that I did. So I went to college, and I became good at it, and didn't know what I was doing, didn't know why I was doing it. And I ended up graduating in 4 years from Kent State University with a degree in, it's called Applied Conflict Management, which Johnny will tell you is a great degree for me because I'm a good mediator, negotiator. For that whole time, I still had no idea what I was going to do. I was working 70 to 80 hours a week as a bodyguard and doing surveillances and investigations for a private company. I have a whole different life that happened after music that involves guns and badges and law enforcement stuff. But where this took me was I ended up working as an investigator for child support in Summit County where we live, and getting my master's degree in 2019. So from 2000 and basically 12 to 2019, I got my GED, went to police academy, went to college, and then got my master's degree. So it's been a life.
Wow.
It's been crazy. And so now it took me to where I'm at now, and that is a juvenile probation officer. The first day of training, they asked, "Why are you here?" I honestly said, my why is because I want to change kids' lives. I want to do what I know that my daughter did. Because nothing I really did up to that point, even all the concerts, all of the touring and all the ministry, all the stuff that we were involved with really had no meaning to me anymore. I don't know if that's sad to say, or, you just get jaded by everything, but this was a brand new life.
When you look at the Coles notes, it's like this kid of a family who's deep in the mafia, who has ADHD, who has a master's, and is now pouring his life into the next generation to help them have a chance. That's wow. When
I speak about this stuff, and I just actually was teaching a class at Kent State last week, and my kids and my wife actually were able to come. And it was weird that, I just sat there and I'm like, how did I get here? How did all of this stuff happen? I was a music dude. I skateboarded. I didn't care about, I actually did not like law enforcement. I was your typical skater, punk rock, hardcore listening kid. So now I'm teaching a class on criminology.
Wow.
So it was an experience.
No kidding.
And we're not done.
A lot of people will hear no from God. How do you navigate when God says no?
One, with God saying, with me hearing God's voice say, "I'm not going to save her," it prepared me to be able to do what I needed to do. So when you hear that no, just prepare yourself for whatever you need to prepare yourself for. Because it's not like I was asking for $1 million. It's not like I was asking for a new car or a new house. I was asking him to save my kid, which thousands of kids a day are saved by normal doctors doing their thing. But to be told no and basically prepare yourself, that for me, if she would have probably died in any other way, like maybe a car accident or something like tragic like that, I think I would have been destroyed. I think God allowed that time for myself to work on my own heart, because there's no way, shape, or form that any parent could sit there and go through something like that and be prepared for it any other way than having the grace of God being there for you. I mean, I knew he was there for me. I just may not have felt like I was there for him. And I think it all boiled down to my attitude at the point of I was just angry and frustrated. And it took me through a very big black time. I mean, my friends will tell you that some of them aren't even friends anymore because they didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know how. We lost our house, we lost our cars, we lost our business, we lost our kid. And then amongst that, we lost our church. Our church imploded that we were going to for 3 years. And we were very close with everybody. And pastors moved to Texas and no one stayed in touch. And it was all gone. Everything. So we were in the midst of a rebuild and for our family, for our spiritual health, and for just pretty much every aspect of our life at that time. So when you hear no, just take it and run with it.
You have an incredible story of frustration, but hard work and dedication and love and family. We appreciate you so much for sharing the beautiful story of Skylar. Despite the fact that you hung out with POD, we know the Imperials are your favorite at DFresh1976 on the Insta. Doug, my friend, this has been incredible, and I appreciate you so much.
I appreciate you guys having me on to talk about one of the greatest people in my life, which was my daughter. Thank you.
What a life. If he doesn't write a book, I'll be a little mad.
I think this is our chance to pressure him.
I think so, because just hearing about how his life started to where he is now and all the twists and turns and wow, just so much encouragement to see how God has used him and his family and just the impact that they've had. It's phenomenal. And
what I also love is a promise is a promise.
Yeah.
She said, I want you to get your GED. And I mean, look at how far he's come now. And it is quite amazing to see. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Projectors, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for being a part of what we are doing, what we are trying to do, what we are growing. We've been like number one or like top 10 in like countries that I had to look on maps. Yeah. Madagascar. What? That's an island. That's fantastic. It's not just a movie and a place. It's people who listen to some of the podcasts. So thank you if you're listening outside of Canada or the US. We so appreciate you, and truly hope that there's little nuggets that will encourage you as you go throughout your day. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out on all the socials. You can email us. You could download Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and tell friends, family members, and complete strangers. Yes, and we are slowly building our YouTube channel, so check that out. Pretty much all of our handles are at Why Me Project Podcast.